Hey, Faith Unfiltered podcast listeners. This is your host, Blake Smith. We're going to pick up on part 2 of the Percolating on Faith interview between myself and my guests, Tony and Charmaine Chvala-Smith, where we're talking about faith and doubt. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, you can find it at faithunfilteredpodcast.org. I often say it's both a blessing and a curse to have, to be in a church that has such an open theology and a place for people to find their space in that community. But it is important. It's so, and as I talk to more and more people who are on some of those spaces that we wouldn't normally associate with the community of faith, and finding out how important and meaningful that is for them to be able to be there, it enforces how much of the blessing part that is for us.
Yeah, right.
And I think so that we don't self-exclude, one of the things that might be a good antidote is to, instead of focusing only on what do I not believe in now, is to focus on what do I believe in now. You know, maybe your journey, experience, or learning has meant that the God you started with is too small. You know, so maybe this sense that God, and in your story about world faiths, you know, sometimes this is about letting God be bigger than the definitions that we either started with or that our church or our culture may have about God. And so, you know, how do we affirm what we do believe? So, yeah, we may have let go of some things about our ideas about God. So God might not be so male as we might have thought when we first started believing, or as predictable, or as angry, or as judgy. But what we may have come to is this idea, a view of God that's now more about mystery, or about justice, or maybe God is a term, instead of using the God term, which we may feel awkward with because we feel like we'll be misunderstood, or that we're not being honest with ourselves if we use the word God. You know, there's other things that we might believe about the sacred, about the holy. And we might use terms like goodness or connectedness, that which connects all of us and all of creation. So, you know, there's ways of saying, what do I believe in and how do I value that? How do I live into it, or give other people other options to begin to let God be something more.
This can be a place too where actually taking the risk to learn some things from past Christian tradition could be helpful. For example, medieval theologians, many of them came to think of God as esse ipsum, being itself. Is not derived being like me, but ultimate being that grounds everything else. And they understood that the other terms they used for God, most of them understood that those were metaphors for this ultimate source of all being that they encountered in worship and scripture and daily experience and so on. So there are other ways. If the term God starts getting in the way, there are other ways to refer to the ultimate that are equally rich and meaningful, and actually part of Christian tradition, which we typically don't know very well. So
that's really helpful. I just, as you're talking, I'm thinking about another one of the struggles that I went through early on was the whole idea of inclusive language, and having been brought up in a part of the church where there was only one term for God, and not understanding why that wasn't okay anymore. That also that my change in thought on that came again with relationships with people. But I'm thinking now, as we're talking to folks who are either in crisis, spiritual crisis, I appreciate Charmaine, that you even said, we might not call it faith for people on this journey. They may already be at a place where faith is not the word. But the idea then of having this opportunity or permission giving again, to think of the divine or the sacred as something other than God, because God itself as a word has a lot of imagery with it that might be exclusive.
There may be too much baggage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a side note, in American Christianity, the term God is often now seen as a mascot for the nation, and that has nothing to do with the Bible, nothing to do with Christian tradition, nothing really to do with Community of Christ theology, but it's certainly in the culture. The idea that, in God we trust. Well,
which God?
Yeah, which God, right? And what do you mean by God? So yeah, finding other terms might be helpful when a term gets to be laden with baggage.
Yeah.
Speaking of terms, there's one other thing that would be helpful, I think, maybe for the listeners. I know it was for me as I grew in my understanding, but the distinction between agnostic and atheist. I hear folks who are self-identifying because they no longer believe in this traditional idea of God, but are somewhere in maybe a spectrum of understanding. Can you delineate,
Sure,
distinguish between those? Maybe that might be helpful.
And so now you're going to get a Greek lesson.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he is multilingual.
and the Greek lesson is free of charge today. So atheism from two Greek words, atheos, no God, right? In other words, an atheist absolutely thinks there is no reality connected to the word theos, God. Agnostic, agnoen, not to know. Different. There may be a God, I just don't know for sure. That's agnosticism. It's not making an unequivocal statement, there's no such reality as God. It's more like, I just not sure, I don't think I know. And that would be an agnostic.
Yeah.
That's helpful because I hear people go immediately to atheist. Mm-hmm. And yet as they talk and share about what's important to them, there is the presence of something other.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it may already have another name. It may already be something like goodness or connectedness. And so they may not be quite as atheist as they think, but
sure.
But maybe they want that title too. And maybe that is exactly where they are. And that's
right. And I don't mean in any way to diminish someone's
not at all.
To self-identify that way, because that's important. But I think the clarification.
No, I appreciate that. And because I think sometimes people think that if they are questioning, then they must be either agnostic or atheist. And so to have that distinction, I just think I'm really glad you brought that up. I think one other piece that is difficult for people who are in this process of, I'm going to say growing in faith, stretching, shedding their skin and finding new layers in themselves of spirituality, of connectedness, of hope, of knowing the power of love with a capital L, all of those things that can be part of this journey is that you may find that you have a bunch of feelings you're not sure what to do with. And one of them can be, and this is often those who've had are more intellectually inclined, and that's where the change is coming from, is from the new ideas they have. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's from people who've had new kinds of experiences, but we can end up feeling judgmental or superior to the people around us who we don't think have been on this part of the journey. And we might see our new information as making us wiser or smarter than the people around us. And so sometimes we may want to tell other people what they should think or feel or experience, and without realizing that we are undermining their experience, that we are diminishing theirs but we may be very afraid of our own being diminished. And that may be part of the sometimes aggressiveness that we feel in this part of our journey, is that we correct other people or tell them that, well, you shouldn't do that or you shouldn't think this. And that's just something we have to be careful of when we're in this time of struggle and letting go and picking up new things, is to trust that other people's journeys are just as valuable as ours are.
You know, I hate snakes, but I love that image of shedding skin. That the spiritual life, the spiritual journey is about shedding skin again and again and again. So
well, and Tony, you had been talking about this kind of this
threefold pattern and
kind of a psychological development. So.
And this may be a place where I'm going to pull up some pictures.
Okay.
So here we go. So basically, where I learned this was through reading a bit of a philosopher of religion named Paul Ricoeur, and some people who were influenced by Ricoeur. Ricoeur is a really dense read, and so sometimes it's easier to read the people who've read and understood Paul Ricoeur. But and also, if you Google, for example, Paul Ricoeur's First Naivete, AI will come up and actually give you a very accurate summary of Ricoeur's ideas about this. And so Ricoeur was a French philosopher of religion, was a French Protestant, brilliant thinker. I think he taught at the University of Chicago for a while. And he came up with this in terms of trying to understand the development of how we relate to Scripture, but it has much wider implications for the faith journey. And so he refers to our starting point is the first naivete, right? And it's what Charmaine learned as a kid about creation, and what Tony first learned when he joined the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and learned the slides and the One True Church, and Joseph Smith was a flawless individual, all that stuff. So it's pre-critical innocence is a way to think of it, or childlike simplicity. You accept what you just have accepted what was taught as the way reality is, religious reality is, and you feel at home with it. You use faith language in an unselfconscious way. There is an underlying fear of criticism of that because there's a tenderness about this, right?
And it's so important.
Yeah. It's especially if this has happened to you as a young adult, like it did to me. There's a fear of it being criticized because it's now completely changed your life framework, and you don't want anything messing with that. And then your use of faith language, faith terminology, theological terminology, and I'm going to use some Thomas Aquinas, is what's called univocal. The word means what it says. Baptism means baptism. Faith means faith. There's no stretchiness with the language here. It's very, as kids learn language, this is what it is. And so an analogy I can use with this is, and I'm going to be careful here, Blake. I don't want to mess up your faith in Santa Claus, but
no, don't do it. Don't do it. Just for the record, my grown adult children know that the day they say they don't believe in Santa Claus is the day they don't get any more gifts.
All right. Well,
so it's amazing how strong their belief is.
Stay with Dr. Ricoeur and me here for a little bit. So you start off, and as a kid, Santa Claus is real. How could it not be real? Right. So now we're going on to the next thing, which is, I'm not sure what Ricoeur calls this. I just call it the critical moment, and it may be longer than a moment. So new information, new experience leads to questioning and loss, a sense of grief and loss. I no longer have the childlike simplicity. I no longer can believe what I used to believe about X, Y, or Z, or Z if you're Canadian.
Thank you. Or believe everything that the person says, right. That told me about that.
So you experience this critical distancing from ideas and or the community. Now, the critical distancing, actually, if you look up Ricoeur under AI, that will come up. But it's a great term because you all of a sudden feel estranged from home, right? You're no longer you may keep going to church, but you're not at home there anymore. You feel distant and separated from everybody.
Different, too different.
And now, instead of the unselfconscious use of faith language, you now self-consciously often reject or disdain faith language, right? This can become problematic here. The next place, you become critical of people in stage 1. I think those people, they're so naive, and we haven't gotten to stage 3 yet. But you confuse stage 3 with stage 1. We'll get there in a minute. And sometimes the danger here is being judgmental, and faith language here starts to become meaningless to you. It's just gibberish the church made up, and so on, right? And so now this is where you know, as a who knows how old you are when you discover Santa Claus is really mom and dad. It's a stupid deception.
Oh, Blake's face.
Stay with me, Blake. Blake, stay with
wait
me.
a minute. I'm going to need a minute.
He's twitching.
He's twitching there. So now, this critical time or moment, one of the dangers here is that it gives you a sense of power, and it's very easy to just stay here for the rest of your life.
Power is in being superior or in judging people as not being as
enlightened or developed. Yeah. Right.
But it's also all these other things that we've been talking about. This place where you're open to new ideas. You realize that letting go of some things doesn't kill you.
Yeah.
That it's okay to let go of some things and to pick up some new ideas. And it can be a very invigorating place. And so that's another reason why sometimes people end up staying here.
Yeah. But you don't have to just stay here.
Right.
So we're going on to what Ricoeur calls the second naivete. And this is post-critical. It doesn't mean you stop being critical. It means that you've moved beyond the critical moment to a kind of what Paul Jones, the theologian Paul Jones, referred to as resymbolizing. You've begun to realize, you know, there's deep meaning in the stuff that I once believed. I don't believe it quite in the same way, but I wonder if there's new ways to express it. And that would be called resymbolization. Questions are no longer to be feared. And they're no longer now power tools you can use over other people. They are now, the questions become an integral, natural part of your faith journey. There's new depth and comfort with ambiguity. That is, I can hold two things at the same time, right? Two seemingly contradictory things at the same time.
And you're okay with it.
I'm okay with that.
You don't feel guilty about it.
Right. And a new kind of comfort with the community. You come to see the community as its own rich, nuanced place where people are on a journey. And in the second naivete, you will start to feel at home again in church, but in a new way. You're not backing up to first naivete, but you start to feel at home again. These are my people. This is my place. This language I've come to understand, I can make sense of this language in some new ways. And that's the next thing. You can reclaim a more nuanced or transformed use of faith language, right? You may have come to understand God is not a male dude in the sky, right? And so, but Father language as part of the whole lexicon of terms used for God has a certain kind of value and meaning. And I don't have to disparage it, but I also don't have to use it solely, right? And so now, instead of being afraid of critique, or you want to criticize everybody, you're just open to fair critique of your position. That can be different from where the critical moment is, because the critical moment, as I said before, the critical moment will be hostile towards first naivete and towards second naivete, and will confuse them. Right? So
you can't tell the difference quite often when you're in the critical moment, whether someone's in the first or the second naivete, and so you may have disdain, equal disdain.
and whereas in the critical moment you start to think of faith language as meaningless, now you come to understand that faith language is what Thomas Aquinas would call analogical. It's symbolic, metaphorical, not merely symbolic or merely metaphorical. No, 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 no. No, if it's symbolical in an analogical way, it's pointing to depths. It's the only way for us to get to certain depths, in any kind of way at all. And so, you come to understand, you can start using theological language again because it's got a much bigger horizon of meaning for you. All right, now for Santa Claus. So now maybe you do a little searching, you realize, wait, there was a historical figure, Saint Nicholas of Myra. Myra was an area, a community in southeastern Turkey in the 4th century, and Saint Nicholas was the bishop of Myra. And you discover that the stories around Saint Nicholas are that as a bishop, he tried to raise money and give money to poor families who had daughters with no dowries and thus no future except prostitution or sex slave trade, basically. And so Saint Nicholas of Myra is remembered for having provided gifts of money to poor families so their daughters could be marriageable. Now, I know that's 4th century marriage practices. Sorry, I hope that ain't going on anywhere right now.
But it was life or death for many young women.
My son-in-laws don't listen to this; they'll be expecting a dowry.
And so now you understand. Now when you see Santa Clauses in the mall, if you've got a mall left, if you see pictures of Santa Claus or son, or you watch Miracle on 34th Street or whatever, it's like that whole figure maybe has been co-opted a lot by capitalism, but it's actually pointing to a deep religious truth and an actual figure back there who did some things that we ought to be doing today. That is caring for those who have less.
And challenging the societal norms by making a way where the systems would not have made a way. And he was known for many other generous acts as well. But so as Saint Nicholas can now be a way of appreciating Santa Claus and letting Santa Claus stand for your other siblings.
Billy, do not take the little Santas off your Christmas trees. We're not telling you to do that. Now you can look at those little Santas and say, oh, that's like Eastern Orthodox language. That's like an icon that allows me to see through to the reality that was behind that, which was deep Christian concern for the poor and caritas, charity, in the sense of outgoing love for them expressed tangibly. And that then allows you to re-symbolize the Santa Claus story. And you don't have to diss Santa Claus anymore. You can understand that it's a whole new way of understanding it, right? And so that's kind of how second naivete works. And you don't get to second naivete by just like going on a retreat. This is the second naivete retreat, and by the end of this weekend, you'll all have second naivete. No, it kind of
bad though.
You have to hang in there with the community, and you have to, when you're in the critical moment or critical time, critical decade, whatever it is for you,
decades.
The one thing you have to practice there is a certain kind of waiting and humility, and a recognition that it's possible to critique your critique. Right? In other words, so that's kind of one of the ways you get there. But in other words, this is a way. Thank you, Paul Ricoeur, a way for us to think about moving through the experience of faith and unbelief and doubt and growth and struggle and wrestling and then the challenge for us as a church is making the church a safe place for this to happen. So,
and thank you also for saving a little piece of Santa Claus for me. So I appreciate that.
and because I did, I'm expecting a Christmas present from you.
There you go. I owe you something. I don't know.
Well, and in a shorter version of this, something that for those who are on the journey and who may find themselves in the critical moment or maybe in the second naivete, if you're still questioning yourself about am I faithless? Am I, because even though the critical moment may make us feel superior, it also often makes us question, where am I really? And is it okay to be where I am? But one of the things that one can remind oneself of is to look back and to say, when I first started this journey, I sensed God's presence. But look at the things I believed then. And then you take another step, a decade later and say, oh, no, I still was experiencing God in that moment, even though some of my ideas had already changed. And now my ideas have changed a whole lot. And I might even disdain is such a good word. Disdain what I had when I began, but I still sense God's presence with me. I still believe that God is with me, or I see other people who are in this part of their journey as well. And I still have this sense that something is with me, that there is a presence, that is holding me. And so that does two things. It helps us be centered in where we are and be okay with where we are. But it also helps us to not judge ourselves or others who are in a different place. Yeah. And kind of reminds us that God may not be as hard on us as we are on ourselves. And that whatever we perceive the holy or sacredness or the power of love to be, that it may be bigger than our faith, our faithlessness, our doubts, our questions, or those core things that we've taken along that we do believe.
And Charmaine has helped me experience a second naivete about snakes today, too.
Oh, yeah.
Shedding.
Oh, that's what those creatures are for. Oh, I love that. Love that image.
So I want to ask a question about those folks who are most likely part of our listening audience that struggle living in the questions, but need something a little more concrete, some answers. What might we say to them?
A place I would start is that we're, as a community, we're not answerless, right? Right. In other words, we have an understanding and an experience of God as love itself, calling, beckoning, embracing, transforming, healing. That's part of an answer. We have the stories and symbol of Jesus as the kind of our window into what divine reality is like. That's an answer. We have our own experiences. Our experiences, we'll say, of the Holy Spirit, whether at camp or reunion, or I was a counselor at senior high camp, or I was a camper once upon a time, and this happened, and it was so real to me. Yeah, it really was real. In other words, and so then in terms of church stuff, we've got like enduring principles and sacraments and so on. So there are various answers available, and I think the most important one is that we believe in a God who, in a Doctrine and Covenants section, says recently, God delights in each faithful step, in each trusting step you take. And so we have places to stand. We're not just sinking in a marsh here. We have places to stand.
Yeah, and I think that if we look at the bigger picture of our church and its spiritual journey, we see that it has been willing to ask the questions. We often talk about the 60s and 70s in the church as being this time when we entertain looking at our history in a different way. We start interacting with other Christian churches and saying, wait a minute, there's much to learn here and much to share. So our journey as a church has also been willingness to entertain the questions or the doubts and trust the God who called us in the first place, who met us in the first place. So that might be another way to have some comfort with the fact that we can't help but question. We can't help but doubt. We can't help but have to let go of some things and pick up some other things. But at the same time, there are these constants. The idea that the nature of God's self is to be self-revealing, to invite in all within hearing, all within embracing. That the sacraments are signs of God's presence and wanting to be present with us in all parts of our lives. That the community is to stay close to the community as close as you can, to be reminded that there's this other way of being in the world that's related, and that people all along have carried that unease about this growing that's happening. I don't think we've used that word yet, but the questioning brings growth, and growth means, if it's kids, it means new shoes, longer pants, we have to end up changing when we're growing, because the old things don't fit anymore. And so, we've done that as a church, but then there's all these, and the enduring principles are wonderful because, we sometimes say they're kind of like God's thumbprint on us. And these are,
right.
And so they're not rules, These are descriptions.
Principles.
They're principles. We've moved from a rule-based to a principle-based church. And that means the principles help us, help guide us in how we interact with the world, with each other, and ways we can understand God. So those are some of those anchoring points that can be helpful when the questions seem too big, or the changes seem too severe or threatening or frightening. I think it's a good balance.
Well, with you guys as teachers, as professors, I am quite sure that you would have some recommendations, maybe of some resources that people might look to and consider as they journey.
Yeah. So, here's a book I think we would recommend on the God question. It's a book titled, What is God? Not who, but what. What is God? And it's written by a philosophical theologian named John Haught, Haught. And John Haught has written quite a number of fabulous books. One of his areas is religion and science and God and evolution. He wrote a book a few years ago called God and the New Atheism, in which he actually kind of takes on some of the new atheistic critiques that have come out of some scientific circles in England and other places, and pushes back on them gently and thoughtfully. But the book, What is God, gives you all kinds of new ways to think about the idea of God that move away from the personal dude in the sky image to such things as futurity, futureness, beauty, and so on. In other words, there are concepts we can use to get at what is meant by God that provide a whole new way to imagine what we mean by God. So,
and I would say on probably the other extreme, Haught is wonderful, but I would say it's good to study as a small group or a group and take it a little at a time, because there's so much there, and so digest it together with a group. We've done it a few times with groups. The other would be books like Kate Bowler, Bowler, the book entitled Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved.
Oh, you had me there for a second.
But it's her own life story. And so people who are questioning, or people who don't understand this concept at all and want to understand what people go through in this process, that would be a very good book. She was a good Christian girl and doing all the right things. She was even about to enter seminary, and maybe she was in her first year.
She was at PhD. She just graduated. She was just starting to teach at Yale. Yale Divinity School, Duke Divinity School. She just started to teach.
Okay, Charmaine, I have to say that I'm probably not the only one that heard that little slip. I think you said cemetery, not first and then switched to seminary. And I've heard that I've heard that happen a lot of times by other people. So
that's funny. Yeah, I was thinking, gonna restart that word.
I know I could salvage this. It's like Kate Bowler all of a sudden is diagnosed with like stage 3 or 4 cancer.
Or colon cancer, I think. And anyhow, so she's going through this whole process of questioning all of the different things. And she had been doing studies with the prosperity gospel churches. That's what her doctoral dissertation was on. You're right. She had finished her doctoral and so she's going through all the questioning and having to say, wait, this whole thing about everything happens for a reason. I just had a child and the prognosis is not good. And my husband's going to have to raise this child. Is that God's will? And so she goes through questioning a whole bunch of things, and you can kind of see her journey through all of this. So it's an excellent book to get a snapshot of what someone, why that process is necessary for many people.
And then I think there's a classic book on the meaning of faith, and that's Paul Tillich's book, The Dynamics of Faith. It's a little thin paperback. You have to give yourself some time to read it, but it's really brilliant. He articulates the idea of faith as a state of being ultimately concerned, and so in other words, he gets to that what is the underlying actuality of the thing we call faith, and it's not first and foremost faith in stuff. It's a disposition towards the ultimate.
Okay.
And it can help us get away from simplistic understandings of faith as I got to believe X, Y, and Z, or I'm not saved, and stuff like that. And so it's a really nice and thoughtful book by a theologian who was very instrumental in the 1970s and 80s in terms of influencing Community of Christ leaders. So there's another book called I Have My Doubts. I forget which theologian it's by. I want to say Hendrikus Berkhoff, a Dutch theologian. I think maybe that's it. But it's a theologian who titles a book, I Have My Doubts. So might be an interesting text to look at. So those are some things we can recommend for.
That's great. And we'll put a list of those in the show notes so folks can look them up and verify the authors. I also want to note that, Charmaine, you mentioned the preaching charts early on in our talk today. And so if you're listening to this and you have no idea what the preaching charts are, episode 437 of Percolating on Faith. We don't have 437 episodes of Percolating on Faith. It's 437th episode in the Faith Unfiltered podcast series. And it is a Percolating on Faith episode, but it's on the preaching charts. Very fascinating work. Very fascinating. So, and I only recently found out there was more than one. So, I had only seen one in several different venues. And then I saw the work on this and the number of preaching charts. And it's fascinating, the evolution of that. So, well, let me ask before I close out, is there anything else that our folks who are in this path or journey, whether they've just entered a time of faith crisis or they've self-identified already as agnostic or atheist, that you would want them to hear today?
Sure. You are seen and you are known in all the good ways.
And you are accepted.
Yeah.
And you are part of us. This is part of the journey that we're all on. And so you are representations of what we all are processing, what we all are seeking, what we're all looking for. It's good. It's good to be with each other on this journey.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I know that some of my conversations this summer with folks along that spectrum, along that path and journey, the questions that they asked and the perspectives that they shared helped me with some of my own questions or create new questions that I
Sure.
want to dig into. So,
Yeah.
And how wonderful that they had the courage or the confidence to share that. And they knew you would be a good ear, I think that's a really cool thing.
Yeah.
well, for our listeners here that aren't in that space, but are living in community where there are others, I hope that you are hearing to give permission for that and to open yourself to the experience of richness that comes from being in those conversations. And for our listeners who are here because you're in that crisis place, and I hope this has been as helpful for you, even as it has been for me, and that you hear those words that you are loved and you are accepted and there's a place and you're valued. And we're just so glad you're with us. Those are important words. Tony and Charmaine, as always, you guys are amazing. I love just hanging out with you, and especially when we accomplish something like this. So from our times at Graceland and our group meetings that we had supporting one another, to being at conferences and being at reunions and then being together here, it's just fantastic. So thank you so much.
We always enjoy time with you. And even though we're not anywhere near that season yet, let me just say Merry Christmas to you, Blake.
Watch your mail. Watch your mail, Tony. There's been something.
We hope you've been good.
I checked all the boxes. I'm sure to be blessed. So you guys take care. Thank you to our listeners for being with us today. We just are always so glad that you're with us, that you choose to spend part of your day with us. And we hope that the rest of your day will be all that you need it to be. Blessings and take care.